Your car is hard to start, suddenly stalls, loses power, or triggers the check engine light. Many drivers immediately replace a sensor, only to find the problem doesn't go away. That's because the symptoms of a bad crankshaft sensor and a bad camshaft sensor can look very similar. But there are a few key signs that can help you tell which one is actually failing. In this video, we'll compare the symptoms side by side, explain the differences, and show you how to identify the most likely culprit before spending money on unnecessary parts. Number 1. Crankshaft sensor versus camshaft sensor. What does each sensor do? Before comparing the symptoms, it helps to understand what each sensor actually does. While both sensors work together to keep the engine running properly, they have different jobs, and when one of them fails, the engine often reacts in different ways. The crankshaft position sensor monitors the position and rotational speed of the crankshaft. The engine computer uses this information to determine engine speed and precisely control ignition timing and fuel injection. Because this signal is so critical, a failed crankshaft sensor can sometimes prevent the engine from starting at all. The camshaft position sensor, on the other hand, monitors the position of the camshaft. This allows the engine computer to identify which cylinder is on its compression stroke and helps control fuel injection timing and variable valve timing system. When the camshaft sensor fails, the engine may still run, but performance and drivability are often affected. Since both sensors provide timing information to the engine computer, some of their symptoms can overlap. That's why many vehicle owners mistake one problem for the other. Let's start with the symptoms that both sensors can cause, before looking at the signs that make each failure unique. Number 2. Symptoms both sensors can cause. One reason these sensors are so often confused is that they can trigger many of the same symptoms. Since both sensors provide critical timing information to the engine computer, a problem with either one can affect how the engine starts, runs, and responds. Check engine light. One of the most common signs of either a failing crankshaft sensor or camshaft sensor is an illuminated check engine light. When the engine computer detects missing, incorrect, or intermittent timing signals, it typically stores a diagnostic trouble code and turns on the warning light. However, the check engine light alone cannot tell you which sensor is responsible. Hard starting. A faulty signal from either sensor can make the engine difficult to start. The engine computer relies on accurate timing information to determine when to inject fuel and fire the spark plugs. If that information is delayed or inconsistent, the engine may crank longer than normal before finally starting. Engine misfires and rough running. Both sensors can cause misfires, rough idle, or hesitation during acceleration. When the engine computer loses accurate timing data, combustion events may not occur exactly when they should. As a result, the engine may feel rough, stumble under load, or respond poorly to throttle input. Reduced engine performance. Drivers may also notice a loss of power or sluggish acceleration. Without reliable timing signals, the engine management system may switch to a backup strategy that limits performance in an attempt to keep the engine running safely. Poor fuel economy. Another symptom shared by both sensors is reduced fuel efficiency. Incorrect timing information can disrupt fuel delivery and combustion efficiency, causing the engine to burn more fuel than necessary. So if both sensors can cause the check engine light, hard starting, misfires, and poor performance, how do you tell which one is actually failing? The key is to look for the symptoms that are more specific to each sensor. Let's start with the crankshaft position sensor. Number 3. Symptoms more specific to a failing crankshaft position sensor. While both sensors can cause similar drivability problems, a failing crankshaft position sensor often creates more severe symptoms. That's because the crankshaft sensor provides one of the most important signals the engine computer needs to determine engine speed and ignition timing. Engine stalls. Suddenly while driving. One of the strongest signs of a failing crankshaft position sensor is an engine that suddenly stalls while driving. If the sensor signal disappears unexpectedly, the engine computer may lose track of crankshaft position and immediately shut off fuel injection and ignition. In some cases, the engine may restart after a few minutes, while in others, it may refuse to start at all. Cranks, but won't start. Another common symptom is an engine that cranks normally but won't start. Without a reliable crankshaft position signal, the engine computer may not know when to fire the spark plugs or inject fuel into the cylinders. As a result, the starter turns the engine over, but combustion never occurs. No RPM reading during cranking. On many vehicles, a failed crankshaft sensor can cause the tachometer, or RPM reading, to remain at 0 while the engine is being cranked. Since the engine computer is not receiving an engine speed signal, it cannot display accurate RPM data. Although this symptom doesn't occur on every vehicle, it can be a useful diagnostic clue. Intermittent starting problems. Crankshaft sensors often fail intermittently before they stop working completely. The engine may start normally one moment and refuse to start the next. In many cases, heat is a contributing factor. As the sensor warms up, internal electrical components can begin to malfunction, causing the signal to drop out unexpectedly. Engine shuts off and restarts. Later, some drivers report that the engine stalls unexpectedly, but starts again after cooling down for several minutes. This is a classic symptom of a crankshaft sensor that is becoming heat sensitive. Once the sensor temperature drops, it may temporarily begin working again until the problem returns. Summary of crankshaft sensor symptoms. If your vehicle suddenly stalls while driving, cranks but won't start, shows no RPM signal during cranking, or experiences intermittent no-start conditions that seem worse when the engine is hot, the crankshaft position sensor becomes a strong suspect. But what if the engine still starts and runs, yet feels rough, sluggish, or lacks performance? In that case, the camshaft position sensor may be the more likely culprit. Let's look at the symptoms that commonly point to a failing camshaft sensor. Number 4. Symptoms more specific to a failing camshaft position sensor. Unlike a failing crankshaft sensor, a bad camshaft position sensor often allows the engine to keep running. However, the engine may no longer operate as efficiently as it should. This can lead to a variety of performance-related problems that gradually become more noticeable over time. Extended cranking before startup. One of the most common signs of a failing camshaft position sensor is longer than normal cranking before the engine starts. Because the engine computer uses camshaft position data to identify cylinder timing, a missing or inaccurate signal can delay the startup process. The engine may eventually start, but it often takes longer than usual. Rough idle and engine hesitation. A faulty camshaft sensor can also cause rough idling and hesitation during acceleration. When valve timing and fuel delivery are not synchronized correctly, the engine may feel unstable at idle or hesitate when the accelerator is pressed. Drivers often describe this as a lack of smoothness or delayed throttle response. Reduced engine power. Another common symptom is reduced engine performance. The vehicle may feel sluggish during acceleration, especially when climbing hills or attempting to pass other vehicles. Since the engine computer relies on accurate camshaft data to optimize timing, a faulty signal can limit overall engine efficiency and power output. Variable valve timing problems. Many modern engines use variable valve timing systems to improve performance and fuel economy. A failing camshaft sensor can interfere with this system, preventing the engine computer from accurately adjusting valve timing. As a result, drivers may notice poor acceleration, rough operation, or additional fault codes related to the variable valve timing system. Transmission shift issues. On some vehicles, a faulty camshaft sensor can even affect automatic transmission operation because the engine computer uses sensor data to manage torque and shifting strategies. Incorrect information may result in delayed, harsh, or irregular gear changes. While this symptom is not present on every vehicle, it can occur on certain makes and models. Increased fuel consumption. Drivers may also notice that fuel economy begins to decline. When engine timing is no longer optimized, combustion efficiency suffers, causing the engine to consume more fuel than necessary. Summary of camshaft sensor symptoms. If your engine still starts but takes longer than normal to fire up, idles roughly, hesitates during acceleration, loses power, experiences variable valve timing issues, or develops unusual transmission behavior. The camshaft position sensor may be the more likely source of the problem. At this point, you can probably see why these two sensors are often confused. Some symptoms overlap, while others point more strongly to one sensor than the other. But symptoms alone don't always provide a definitive answer. The best way to identify the failed component is through proper diagnosis. Here's how to confirm which sensor is actually causing the problem. Number 5. How to confirm which sensor is failing. While symptoms can provide valuable clues, they don't always tell the whole story. A bad sensor isn't the only thing that can trigger these problems. Damaged wiring, corroded connectors, timing issues, or even a faulty reluctor wheel can create symptoms that look almost identical. That's why proper diagnosis is always important before replacing any parts. Scan for diagnostic trouble codes. The first step is to scan the vehicle for diagnostic trouble codes. In many cases, the engine computer will store a code related to the sensor circuit or signal. Crankshaft position sensor problems are commonly associated with codes in the P0335 through P0339 range, while camshaft position sensor faults often trigger codes between P0340 and P0349. Although these codes don't automatically prove the sensor itself has failed, they provide an excellent starting point for diagnosis. Check live data. If you have access to a scan tool that displays live data, monitor the crankshaft and camshaft signals while cranking and running the engine. Missing, erratic, or intermittent readings can help identify which sensor is losing its signal. Live data can often reveal problems that may not be obvious from fault codes alone. Inspect the wiring and connectors. Before replacing any sensor, inspect the wiring harness and electrical connectors. Loose terminals, damaged insulation, corrosion, oil contamination, or broken wires can interrupt the sensor signal and create the same symptoms as a failed sensor. In some cases, repairing the wiring solves the problem without replacing any components. Consider mechanical timing issues. It's also important to remember that not every camshaft or crankshaft sensor code is caused by a bad sensor. A stretched timing chain, worn timing components, or incorrect engine timing can cause the engine computer to detect synchronization problems and set sensor-related fault codes. If sensor replacement doesn't solve the issue, mechanical timing should be inspected. Don't replace parts based on symptoms alone. One of the most common mistakes vehicle owners make is replacing parts based solely on symptoms. Since crankshaft and camshaft sensor failures can produce similar complaints, guessing often leads to unnecessary expenses. Confirming the fault with proper testing is usually faster and cheaper than replacing multiple parts and hoping for a fix. Final conclusion. To summarize, both crankshaft and camshaft position sensors can cause hard starting, misfires, poor performance, and a check engine light. However, a failing crankshaft sensor is more likely to cause sudden stalling, intermittent no-start conditions, or an engine that cranks but won't start at all. A failing camshaft sensor, on the other hand, often allows the engine to run, but can lead to rough idle, hesitation, reduced power, and variable valve timing issues. The most reliable way to determine which sensor is failing is to scan for trouble codes, analyze live data, inspect the wiring, and verify proper engine timing before replacing any parts. If you found this comparison helpful, consider subscribing for more automotive diagnostic tips, troubleshooting guides, and repair information. And if you've experienced either a crankshaft sensor or camshaft sensor failure, let us know your symptoms in the comments below.